Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Fred Anton. I'm chairman, longtime chairman of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. I'm also chairman of the group that's putting this event on today, the Pennsylvania Leadership Council. We're here at the PMA offices at 225 State Street in Harrisburg. We appreciate PCN covering this event. It is a very critical time when this event takes place. We have a new governor in Tom Wolf, and we are approaching June 30th when a budget might be passed, or when a budget won't be passed, but when it's required that a budget be passed. As I look around the room here with about 50 or 75 people, I see very many distinguished Pennsylvanians and many who are actively involved in government and politics in Pennsylvania. Our first speaker this morning is Jake Corman. Jake is a Republican senator from the 34th Senatorial District. That's Center, Mifflin, Huntington, and Judiana counties. He was first elected to the Pennsylvania State Senate in 1998. He succeeded his father, Doyle Corman, a man who had an outstanding reputation as a Pennsylvania senator and who I considered then and still consider a friend of mine. Doyle has served and he's risen in the leadership in the Senate. In 2009, he was elected Senate Appropriations Chairman, which is, of course, one of the three leadership positions. And in 2015, for this current session, he was elected Majority Leader of the Pennsylvania Senate, one of the two top positions of the Majority Caucus. It's my great pleasure to introduce Jake Corman.
Well, good morning, and Fred, thank you very much. Fred's been a, I don't know, I'm not to call legend in Harrisburg. I don't throw that term around loosely, but there are legends in Harrisburg. Fred would be one of them, and he is a good friend with my father and has been for many, many years, and he's been very gracious, and I'm sure they have a few stories they could tell. Most of them were probably on the golf course. In fact, my father first got elected to the Senate in 1977, and they passed the budget, I believe, in December that year. He came in a special election, and he was in the minority those days. The Democrats were, I think, 30-20 in the majority. And my father said, I don't know what was going on, but I did play a whole lot of golf that summer because there wasn't anything else to do when you're in the minority. So he just sort of waited to be called in to vote no. And that's what they did. That was his introduction into Harrisburg, his first year. And anyway, it was he was a tremendous public servant, and my career pales in comparison to his, but I try to do it the best that I can. Last November, the people of Pennsylvania had a fairly historic election when it comes to the Pennsylvania government. Obviously, Governor Wolf won an historic election. It was the first time an incumbent had been defeated in a re-election bid, and the governor clearly ran on a fairly progressive agenda, one that he, I think, has sincere belief in. I shouldn't say I think, I know he does. This is something he believes in. And he has brought that agenda forward through his budget presentation, which was far more progressive than what he ran on, but nevertheless was significantly progressive as he introduced a historic spending and tax package for Pennsylvania. Obviously, at the same time that the governor was being elected, the Pennsylvania General Assembly had a fairly historic election. Pennsylvania Senate picked up 3 seats. Matter of fact, it was a net gain of 3, but we won 18 out of 25 seats in the Senate elections last year. We picked up new seats or new members in all corners of the Commonwealth. Monroe County with Mario Scavella, in Delaware County, Southeast with Tom McGarrigle, Southwest, 2 new seats that were held by Democrats, Pat Stefano and Cameron Bartolotta. In the Northwest, Michelle Brooks, not to mention here in Central PA, of course, Ryan Ahmed and Scott Wagner, who had won a special but then was elected to a full term. And they ran on a completely different agenda than what the governor ran on. More of a conservative agenda that was to rein in state government and hold the line on taxes. And the House has a historic election as well, as I see my good friend, the House Whip in the back of the room. They won 120 seats. I think it's up to 120 now. I'm not sure. Is there any House Democrats left, Brian? Or okay, well, there's a couple. I see them at the meetings. But obviously an historic election as well. And I'm pretty confident that not many of them ran on an $8 billion tax increase that the governor has proposed. And so therein lies the very, very bright lines that we are dealing with in Harrisburg today. And one that may have us here for a while, quite frankly. One thing Fred said, that we will definitely pass a budget June 30th. That is going to happen. It will be on the governor's desk. And I think it's a very, very good budget. I think it's a budget that, again, lives up to the mandate that we as legislators ran on, which is to hold the line on spending. This is a small increase. We'll move to about $30.1 billion in this particular plan. But also does what we also mandate that we ran on, which was not to raise taxes, not to increase fees. That is, unlike our friends in Washington, D.C., who, when they spend, they don't have to balance. And so, they just sort of get out of the basement and roll the press the printer up and print out the dollars. Like school districts, like municipalities, like businesses and homeowners, we have to balance our budget. So if we're going to spend more, we have to obviously raise that money. And we raise that from you, from us, taxpayers. There's no other way to get it. It's a pretty simple equation. And so, it's not our belief that sending more money to Harrisburg is good for our economy. There's clearly are investments that we want to make, and clearly there's responsibilities that we need to live up to. We think this budget does that. And that's why we forwarded Billy Adolph, the appropriations chair in the House, loaded it up last week. The House passed it, and we considered it an appropriations yesterday. And as I was listening to the hue and cries of the other side of the aisle about doesn't spend enough money on this, doesn't spend enough money on that, I brought up the fact, well, again, there's only one way to raise those dollars, and that's through taxation. And so obviously you need support to raise those revenues to spend at the level that you're advocating for here. And so I said, at this point, we've only seen one attempt to do that. The House had a vote. The House had a vote on that package. The House Democrats forwarded the governor's spending plan during the budgetary process. And you can't spend almost $34 billion if you don't have $34 billion. So, all right, if you're going to advocate for that spending, okay, here are the revenues to support it, just as the governor proposed. I believe that vote was 193 to 0. 193 to 0. Well, that's a fairly large statement that the votes are not there for that revenue package. And you hear the governor and you hear others say that vote was a sham, that vote didn't mean anything, it was to embarrass the governor. Well, I'm not really sure, first of all, how putting the governor's tax plan up for a vote embarrasses the governor. I mean, it's what he introduced. It's what he wanted to see. And and we have, and granted, in times past, the adage is basically saying you wouldn't vote for taxes or vote for any big controversial bills unless you have a deal. Those days are gone. Just look at what the House did this year on property taxes. And that's an issue that has eluded us for 40 years. And the House, to their credit, has this as a priority that they want to get accomplished. And they put it, even though they don't have a deal with the Senate, and even though there's no deal with the governor on it, they put forward a package that, yes, does raise revenue in the area of income and sales tax with offsetting property tax reduction. But they didn't have a deal, but they still made the vote. All their members are out there hanging, saying, we made this vote to raise these revenues because we believed it was the right thing to do to give property tax relief to the people of Pennsylvania. Go back to last session, transportation. One of the largest investments in infrastructure in Pennsylvania history. Obviously needed revenue to fund that infrastructure investment. The Senate, without any agreement with the House, matter of fact, the House at that time was fairly leery of it and wasn't really interested in doing it. No deal with the governor at that point in time. We went forward. You know, we were passionate enough, we believed in it, we thought it was the right thing to do, and so we went out and put up our votes without any kind of agreement, any kind of deal. We put up our votes, made the votes, and said, you know what, we'll stand by it because we think it's the right thing to do for Pennsylvania. Obviously, later on in that session, the House came on it and passed it, and the governor signed it, and now it's in place. So, you know, there's two examples of people willing to step up and say, this is what I'm for. You know, this is much more policy-driven legislature than it has been in the past, and I'm not trying to make that sound poor of legislatures in the past, but, you know, it's a policy-driven legislature. And so the people stand up for what they believe in. They're not worried about deals. They're not waiting for, you know, agreements. They said, this is what we believe in. This is what we're going to stand behind. And those are two examples where the House this year and the Senate in the last session stood behind what they believed in. And so when the House Democrats had their chance to step up and say, this is what I believe in. I'm on board with the Tom Wolf agenda. We're going to put up the votes to pass this revenue package so we can spend the money we want to spend at the level the governor wants to spend. And what did they do? 0 votes. Well, you know, we got to pass a budget. And so if you don't have new revenues, you got to pass a budget with the revenues that you have. And so that's what's before us. And quite frankly, I think it's enough revenue that we have. It's revenue that, again, allows us to make significant new investments in education. It's revenue that allows us to make significant new investments in agriculture, particularly in the area of avian flu, which is going to be a real problem for the poultry industry this year. It's a significant investment in higher education across the line. We've made some areas where I think are important for the people of Pennsylvania. As I said, only half jokingly, we even found some money, as I see my good friend Bob O'Hara over there, we even found some money for security for the Pope when he comes to Philadelphia. Which, you know, when you're going to have 1.5 million people in the Parkway, it sounds like an event that's great to watch on television, not to be in the Parkway. So we're very excited for that event. It's great for the city of Philadelphia. It's great for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So here we are, very bright lines. You know, the governor has indicated that he's not supportive of what we are doing. Obviously, not only passing a pension bill, we are not only passing a budget bill, we'll be passing a pension bill as well. It's a bill that, you know, I'll be less than honest with you since I was the sponsor of Senate Bill 1. Does not accomplish exactly what I'd like to see it accomplish, but, you know, it's progress in the right direction. It's movement in the right direction, which we need. And if the House is able to lift that bill over the next couple of days, we'll look to take it up as well. And the same with liquor privatization. I'm sure the House could flip that around and say it's not exactly what we had hoped for, but it's progress. You know, we sit around here, and I'll give you 2 examples. First being property taxes, as we talked about earlier. You know, we've been around here for 40 years looking for the perfect bill. And because we were looking for the perfect bill, we've advanced nothing. And so we still have the same problem. Where if you look at gaming, which I sort of hesitant to use as an example because I didn't vote for it, but they got a bill done in 2003, I guess it was. And it certainly wasn't perfect. We've had probably 2 or 3 gaming reform bills in the next 2-3 years to get it right and to improve that piece of legislation. But they got it done. It wasn't perfect. They got it done, and we've, you know, made changes ever since. You know, and liquor, it's time to get it done. You know, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be pretty. My guess is we'll be back at this year after year trying to fix the mistakes that we made, but we're going to advance the issue. It's time to advance the issue for the people of Pennsylvania who've been looking for us to advance this issue for a long period of time. So, you know, if the governor wants to veto all these measures and stand in front of the people of Pennsylvania in the month of July and say we need higher taxes, we don't need pension reform, and we don't need liquor privatization, God bless you. That's an interesting position to take, one that I'm sure, you know, if he looks at the polling, he probably says that you know, the legislature is not particularly popular, which, you know, we're an easy target. I get that, and maybe his polling number is a little higher. But I would like him to compare his polling numbers to legislators in their district and how they're doing in their particular district. And I trust you that our members feel very, very comfortable going home, as we did in 2009 in our long dragged out debate with Governor Rendell, saying that we are making significant investments in education. We are making significant investments in Pennsylvania. We do not believe this is a time to raise taxes. We do not believe the proposed tax proposal to close down tax exemptions for sales tax exemptions for people who pay child care, for people who pay home health care, for people who are buying a home for the first time, people who are paying for funerals, and on and on and on. We do not believe this is a time, and we'll have this debate. We do not believe it's a time to raise taxes on the energy industry. My members come from the Southwest and North Central where this is king. This is where the jobs are. And clearly, I mean, just because of the market itself, the production and investment in Pennsylvania is waning. And so we can exacerbate that by making it more costly to be here in Pennsylvania, or we can be smarter than that and try to embrace the industry and try to figure out ways to get that product to people in Pennsylvania and improve on our infrastructure so that we can benefit greatly from this industry. So anyway, this is what these are the bright lines that are drawn. We will see how it plays out. Anytime you're dealing with the first-time governor, first-time administration, you really don't know for sure how things are going to progress as far as negotiations. When they are able to get into reality, that we can get something that moves Pennsylvania forward. But we feel very comfortable in our position. We feel very comfortable that we're doing our job by having a budget passed by June 30th, by having it balanced, by making strategic investments to move Pennsylvania forward. And if the governor is not satisfied with that, then he can have the opportunity, as he has the right to veto it, and we'll just see where it goes from there. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity to be here. Fred, again, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and I have time for a few questions if anyone has any.
I have a few questions which I think will be of general interest to the audience, so I'd like you to entertain these questions. There are consequences to a budget not being passed, and there are consequences to Wolf vetoing this budget. What is the difference between him signing or line item vetoing some things and signing the budget? What are the dynamics there?
Well, the governor will have options. His first option is he could sign it, which would be my preferred option. Just being honest here. The second thing, he could veto it in whole, which then we would not have appropriation powers until we get a budget passed once July 1st hits. Or he could veto it in part, like you said, line item veto, which the governor can take out pieces of the budget. Recall, I believe it was 2003. Governor Rendell vetoed his own budget that he introduced, that we passed, line for line, but he vetoed just the education part. And so the money was there for the rest of state government to operate, and we just had to come back and debate the education issue, which then ultimately the entire budget was renegotiated. There's been some court decisions over the last few years that it really depends on the governor. He can continue to pay people. If people come to work, they have to be paid. That's been a court ruling in the past. And so you really don't have to get into essential, non-essential employees. People, the money is still coming in. You're not allowed to stop paying your taxes just because there's not a budget. So, the money is still coming to the government. They can still operate. There's no need to close down state parks. There's no need to close down services. There are certain areas that they do not have the authority to appropriate dollars to, but you can essentially, if the governor so chooses, and again, this will be his call, allow government to continue to operate while we hash this out. Or you could take a much more aggressive approach, as Ed Rendell used to try to do, and make it painful for the people of Pennsylvania to hopefully put pressure on the legislature by shutting things down like State Park. I think they actually moved everyone out of State Park for a day. Obviously, this is vacation season. That would be unfortunate. But these are decisions the governor has to make. And we're hopeful that he doesn't allow our sort of ideological differences to impact the people of Pennsylvania, and we can do this as calmly as possible.
Now, along with this budget, I read that you're also going to pass a pension bill.
Yes.
And that will be passed before June 30th. Could you describe briefly what the nature of that pension reform bill is that's going to pass?
Well, I haven't seen the final product in the House yet, but essentially Senate Bill 1 initially was two parts. One was, most importantly, changing the system for the future. The most important part about the pension system is to bring stability to the pension system, which is a precarious position right now. Our systems are funded somewhere in the 60% level. In 1999, 2000, they were both funded at about the 130% level. Obviously, with benefit enhancements and poor returns, we've seen those take a tremendous hit. We are on a pace over time to get it fully funded again. However, if you have a recession anywhere like we had in 2001 or 2008, when your pension systems are funded at a 60% level, that's disaster looking you right in the eye. And so, we believe you need to change the structure of the system, that the structure is a problem. And so to bring stability to the system, which is the most important thing, as retirees will be counting on these dollars, these investments and retirements. Current employees will be counting on these. And so we structured a plan in Senate Bill 1 that would, change the structure so that it would bring stability to the system and predictability to the system. Right now, all the risk is in the hands of the taxpayers. And the taxpayers, when things go poorly, as they have, they're the ones that have to pay the bill. In a defined benefit plan, the employee, which is the contract, so this isn't a knock on employees, but the employee pays a certain amount and it's guaranteed a certain amount, whether the systems do well or not. I would imagine most of you who are not state employees in this room do not have that type of a retirement system. And so to bring predictability to the taxpayers and stability to the plans, we go to a defined contribution for future employees, much like the private sector has done years and years ago. And even for the legislature, we would consider members of the General Assembly a new employee upon re-election. So any new elected member or current member who gets re-elected they're a new employee and they would go in to the defined contribution plan. The other component is looking at current employees. Current employees, obviously the 2001 benefit enhancement has become very, very expensive. And some of the problems we have with the system is that I guess Act 9 of 2001. And so we give options to current employees because we're trying to work with our employees to make sure that they're still in a retirement position that they're comfortable with, but at the same time helps the systems. And we were able to save in our plan over $20 billion to the current systems through different options, variety of options for current employees. Now the House has apparently amended that out, and I think you're going to find out when the PERC note is done, these systems will probably get saved under the House plan somewhere around $8 billion. So as I said earlier, it wasn't exactly what we were hoping for. I understand the theory. A lot of people are worried about the constitutionality of it, of what we did. I think we were on solid ground, but nevertheless, again, it's important to move the issue forward. It's important to move the issue forward, and at the end of the day, we accomplish, which is the most important part of this bill, which is stability for the systems and predictability for the taxpayers. We will have moved this issue a long, long, long way. So that's before us. We will hopefully get that done tomorrow as well.
Okay, now one more question.
Sure.
And that has to do with the liquor component of this. I understand the liquor bill will also pass. Could you tell us where that stands now and whether that's been finalized or whether that's still up in the air?
We passed it out of the Law and Justice Committee yesterday. The attempt is to do it in appropriations today. Tomorrow will be a busy day on the Senate. We're going to do that tomorrow as well, and then hopefully back to the House for concurrence. And essentially what we tried to do, the one issue that had us concerned, that was the important component to our legislation, is even though we're for privatization and even though we're for a more free market system, we were concerned about current licensee holders and the value of those licenses that they've invested in, that they've put their life savings in many cases into to own these businesses. And a lot of businesses outside the LCB that are operating based on the rules that we've created in the past. And so how we tried to do it a little bit different than what the House proposed is to work within that current licensee program. There's a lot of restaurant licenses that are in safekeeping that are not being used right now. And so what we try to do is move this into the private sector hands through the current licensee program as opposed to creating a bunch of new licenses. Having said that, the effect of that will be a lot more different markets than it has in the past. Have been able to sell wine and spirits. And I think that'll be a beginning where and also transfer the liquor sales to the distributors, the beer distributors today. Those licenses can go. The distributors would have first right of refusal to these licenses. And so, and when they begin to open up, then the stores will begin to close. And then ultimately the wholesale would be up for a lease and over time also phase out as well. So it's a little different approach, probably not as aggressive as what our friends in the House put forward, but again, it's finally moving this issue out of the legislature to the governor's desk, and hopefully he'll sign it, and then we can begin to, walk through this, see where we need to continue to negotiate this issue in the future. But again, let's not let the the perfection be the enemy of progress, and so hopefully we'll be able to get this done. We will. All these bills are going to be done tomorrow. I promise you that. Whether the governor signs them is another matter, but we will do our job. And I think all these issues pull extremely well with the people of Pennsylvania, and so we're going to move them forward.
Time for any more questions?
Yes.
Okay.
I should have never said that, but that's
Question?
okay.
Dave?
On cards, if people have questions, they can submit them on the cards.
We'll accept the question. Ask your state your name, ask your question.
You just got
Hopefully,
vetoed.
The question, hopefully these questions will be of general interest and not be a speech. Any questions? State your name, please.
Colin Hanna, Let Freedom Ring. Given the rejection of the governor's budget by Democrats as well as Republicans, what is Democrat leadership in both houses proposing for the budget resolution?
Well, they're proposing the governor's plan still. I mean, they're hanging on to that. They, as I said, they called the House vote a sham, done to embarrass the governor. Again, I'm not so sure how voting on the governor's plan is an embarrassment to him. I would think that they would be supportive of it. They chose not to be for whatever reason, but that is still what they are. This is the same thing you saw in 2009. They're waiting for Republicans to come in and give them, the minimum amount of votes that we need to give them so that they can pass their agenda, and they think that will happen. It didn't happen in 2009. It's not going to happen in 2015. And so, look, he is the governor. And as the governor, he's got to sign our budget, sign our bills, and so he gets a say. I certainly respect that. And, the first time I met with him, or one of the first times I met with him, I said, Governor, the wisdom of the people of Pennsylvania is you sent divided government, or they sent divided government, which means you're going to sign bills you don't like, and I'm going to vote for bills I don't like. That's just divided government. And unless we want to be Washington, D.C. and do nothing, we need to understand that. So I'm prepared to understand that and to prepared to negotiate with the governor. But, there has to be, we got to at least first get in the same hemisphere of what we're talking about, and we're not there just yet. And so they're still hanging on to the governor's proposal, and that's the amendments that you saw yesterday in appropriations for the budget. And, those are nice talking points, but they're not reality.
That's not leadership either, right?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to criticize their leader. That's what they believe in. As I said many times with Senator Hughes, Democrat chair appropriation, it's an honest viewpoint. I know Vince very well, and he was advocating an honest position that he has. It's not one that I share, but it's one that he has, and I respect that. And, again, if we're going to get this done, we just need to sort of understand the fact of what the General Assembly can lift. And trust me, an $8 billion tax increase is nothing the General Assembly can or would lift.
Other questions of general interest? Yes, Earl Baker.
Earl Baker, Pennsylvania Business
Senator.
Council. Senator, regard to the folks. Severance tax.
Look, it's funny. We've had a few discussions, and we were at a meeting, and the administration brought it up maybe 7 times in one sort of budget discussion. And I finally said, I've heard this about 7 times here today, and you've introduced a variety of revenue sources. You introduced a sales tax increase, you introduced a personal income tax increase, you introduced tobacco tax increases, you've introduced all sorts of taxes. You haven't brought any of those up today. So, most, when you're talking about taxes, you're talking about taxes for a revenue source. So, yes, shale would be a revenue source, but so would the others. But you're not seeming to bring those up very often. So, is the reason to consider an energy tax a tax to provide revenue for some sort of investment you're looking for, or is it a pellet? Is it something that you have to have for political purposes? Because, I can easily rename the impact fee a severance tax. That's a short piece of legislation we run through quick, and you'll have your severance tax. So what are we talking about it for? Look, I get it. The governor ran on this issue. He had nice commercials, surrounding himself with children in the classroom, so I get it. And I get it. It's very, very important to them. They think it's that they don't pay their fair share, as I've heard many, many times. You know, again, I look at any sort of taxation. Pat Brown said it best. You know, the state of New York has the highest tobacco taxes in the country. It's not to sell more cigarettes. You know, they're not trying to grow that product by taxing it at that level. You're trying to reduce that product. Matter of fact, that's the whole sort of justification of tobacco taxes, is to reduce the consumption, reduce the usage, and then hopefully reduce some of the ill effects that has on the public's health. So, you know, having energy, you know, companies pay more is not to get them to produce more. It's to get them to produce less, I would imagine, because that's usually the way you get from taxation. So, you know, as I said earlier in the budget season, you know, here we are as a Commonwealth that's sitting on more natural gas play than probably most places in the world. We're constantly referred to as the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. You know, the fact that they're not getting enough revenue from it is not the problem. The fact that we have a whole lot of it and not a lot of demand for it is the problem. And so let's look at this in a much larger perspective. How can we benefit as a Commonwealth? Well, when you have all this natural gas and 50% of the population doesn't have access to it, that's a problem. And so, you know, why not be thinking of ways to build the infrastructure within the Commonwealth, an intra-state line, where we're not subject to federal pricing, to get this product to market so that our consumers can benefit from it and lower our energy prices through just supply and demand. You know, we're already the Keystone State with location. And so we're, you know, one of the places that people want to be because of the population that surrounds this Commonwealth. If you add low energy prices to that equation because of all this access to natural gas, then all of a sudden you are really a pretty attractive place for businesses to locate from anywhere. I mean, not just in Pennsylvania, but from around the world. And that would produce far more revenue to the Commonwealth than anything a tax would provide. And so, you know, if we're looking at tax policy to advance the Commonwealth through whatever strategic investments you want to make or demand that you want for a product, then let's have that discussion. But if we're having a discussion just because I ran on it, and therefore I have to have it for a political victory, that's not a productive conversation. And so, you know, let's look at the energy issue as a whole, see how the best way for Pennsylvania to benefit from that, and then move forward in that direction.
Any more general questions? Yes, sir.
Rod Miller, Burke County Patriots, pensions. Private industry had no trouble going from a defined benefit paid up annuity to a defined contribution.
Yeah.
What seems to be the problem that we can't take that 80–90% of public employees into a 401k right across the board? What seems to be the hang up? And I hear lawsuit potentials and all that. Where did we go wrong?
Well, most people were banking on, I believe it was an early 80s court case that talked about impairment of contract within the Constitution. And that way you cannot impair current, that was they believe, a contract between the Commonwealth and the employees, and so therefore you can't impair that in any way. And that, of course, was a court decision years ago, as we just saw most recently in the Supreme Court. Courts tend to change their opinions over time. So I don't have a problem necessarily challenging that again. And so what we have done, in trying to be respectful and trying to be, again, working as partners with our current employees, because look, you know, again, I've said this to, you know, obviously a lot of people talk about union. This is a union issue, public employee unions. And I've sat down with them and I said, look, you know, this isn't about union issues. This isn't about social policy. This is about math. This is a math equation. You know, is this a sustainable product for the future? You know, I maintain, you know, all the issues that they have in Washington, D.C., if they had to balance their budget, they would have solved them years ago. They would have had to, wouldn't have had a choice. We as a state don't have a choice. So we have to resolve these issues. And so how do we, you know, resolve this pension issue moving forward so that we can put a sustainable product in the future that still allows for a retirement for employees, which is important, but at the same time does not put too much pressure or risk to the taxpayers. And we think that our plan moves that forward. We did not choose to go to define contribution for current employees. We thought that had been pushing the envelope a little far on the constitutionality, judging by previous court decisions. But we did move it forward for new employees that would begin that process. So hopefully we can get this accomplished. As you said, the private sector's gone here a long, long time ago. Most people who were in it were transitioned from a defined benefit to a defined contribution. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with state employees, you're obviously subjective to the courts more than you are in the private sector. So that's where we're standing. We still believe that what we've done will benefit the Commonwealth tremendously.
Jake, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that was a very comprehensive presentation of where we stand now. I want to thank you a lot.
Thanks, Fred. Always
Right.
enjoy being with you.